Today we continue our conversations about Moses, the great prophet of God. And after Moses had delivered the Israelites through the Red Sea or the Reed Sea to the Sinai, and Pharaoh's army was destroyed as the waters crashed in upon them, Moses led them on a 3-month sojourn from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. And we don't know exactly where Mount Sinai is, but there is a location that most pilgrims go to. And I'd like to take you there right now. And as you can see in this video, we're on our way to Mount Sinai. You can see the sea on one side, you can see the desert on the other side. We make our way down finally, 157 miles we travel to Mount Sinai. And when you arrive there, you can see the valley where it's said that the Israelites camped. You can almost picture their tents and their campfires in this place. And then you come to the place where you see the mountain itself, Mount Sinai. In the foreground, you see St. Catherine's Monastery, and you begin the journey up. And typically you take the journey before sunrise. And you make your way all the way to the top, and when you get to the top, you stand and you watch the sunrise over the mountains. It's awesome and majestic. And a reminder that this is the place, or at least it stands for the place, where Moses met God and where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. Now, when we think about the 10 Commandments, many people are put off by these. Today, we used to memorize them when we were children. Very few kids are memorizing them today. And often I think we think, well, these are the thou shalt nots. I don't want to hear thou shalt nots. It sounds sort of drudgery, boring, maybe something we don't really want to pay much attention to. I don't like being told no, and I'm guessing that you don't like being told no. But what's interesting about the 10 Commandments is that these are really rules to live by, given by the grace of God, because He cares for us. He just set the Israelites free from slavery, and He knew that any one of these 10 would enslave them again, in an even worse kind of slavery. And so these are about liberation. They're about helping us find freedom and liberation. They're rules given out of love to care for God's people. And so I'll just remind you of them. You must have no other gods before me. And today we think, well, I don't worship multiple gods. What would that mean to me? But anytime we have something that drives us, shapes us, in which we put our ultimate trust, the thing that's most important to us, if it's not God, it has become for us an idol. And in so many ways, whether it's money, sex, power, our careers, or whatever it might be, when anything else is on the throne of our lives, our own selves, our own pride, or our own ego, when it's on the throne of God and God is not, we become slaves to that thing. And life is not the way it was intended to be. Do not make for yourself an idol, so have no other gods before me. Don't make any graven images or things that you cast with your own hands that you worship. And we think about all of the things that we treasure most that we make with our own physical hands. And God says none of those things are really worthy of your ultimate allegiance. In the end, when you die, you're not taking any of them with you. And some of those things can actually end up destroying you. So Jesus once said, your life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. How we have to remember that today. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. And how often for us, this is not so much as it was in ancient times, invoking the name of God to accomplish something, but things that we say in God's name that don't reflect the character or heart of God, or moments when we carelessly use God's name and don't even think about the fact that we're speaking to the God or about the God of the universe, our Creator and our Sovereign. Remember the Sabbath and treat it holy. And of course, we struggle with this. We are so busy. Most recently, I read a survey that talked about why people aren't going to church. And it wasn't that they largely were turned off by church, is they were too busy. And of course, the command to keep the Sabbath was God's way of saying, I want you to rest. I want you to renew, and I want you to remember who you are. You need to be recreated one day in 7. The Sabbath rest, the command for 1 day in 7 to rest, was not known before Moses delivers this commandment to the Israelites. But it was God's way of saying, in this rhythm, you and your animals and all creation needs to rest and be renewed. And part of that includes remembering who you are in worship and remembering who God is. We honor our fathers, and our mothers. And when we honor our fathers and our mothers, this is God's provision for Social Security. It means that despite the fact that they might drive us crazy sometimes, despite the fact that sometimes they bring pain to us, we still have a responsibility to look after them, to care for them in some way. And so I just ask you, your grandparents, your parents, are there ways in which God is calling you to be able to provide care for them? Do not kill. And this reminds us that God is the one who says, life belongs to me, it doesn't belong to you, it's not yours to take. But Jesus says it goes beyond simply killing. It has to do with matters of the heart. And He says it's about not extracting vengeance against other people, but it's not only that, it's not hating other people. It's not saying, He says, you've heard that it's said of old, do not kill, but I say to you, don't even hate your neighbor. And if you call them an idiot, you're already liable to judgment. And instead He says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do not commit adultery reminds us that God calls us to fidelity. And the fact that these things are on a top 10 list tells us these are all things people struggle with, right? I mean, it wouldn't have made this top 10 list if it wasn't something human beings struggle with, and we all struggle with. the possibility of having affections or feelings for somebody who's not our mate, or somebody who is someone else's mate. And how much pain that brings in our lives when we give in to that, as opposed to recognizing that fidelity is something God cares deeply about, because infidelity brings pain and brokenness and heartache. Now, today we live in a day, an era in which we have access to sexually explicit material 24 hours a day in the quietness of our own home. And yet sometimes when we give in to these kinds of things, what we find is they make us its slave as opposed to giving us liberation. We read that we're not to steal. And as I'm preparing this, in the last week there were 5,300 employees of Wells Fargo that were terminated because they had been creating false bank accounts for people or false credit card accounts. And somehow 5,300 people had got caught up in doing something they knew was wrong in order to make a profit or in order to make their sales goals. In our own lives, anytime we sell a car that has something wrong with it, we don't tell the new owner, or we sell a house and we don't reveal that there's something wrong, we're stealing, we're taking something that doesn't belong to us. And so the question we ask in this is, what price does our integrity have? And then we come to not testifying falsely against our neighbor. And this has to do with being in a courtroom and falsely testifying in a court because it will hurt somebody. But most of us aren't involved in court cases like this. But how easy it is to tweet in 140 characters something that will defame someone else's character, someone that will hurt them, something that will hurt them. And then it gets spread out and retweeted over and over again. Or to gossip about somebody at the water cooler, or to tear down somebody, or to assume the worst about them and to spread that to others as opposed to assuming the best. And then finally, don't desire anything that belongs to someone else. That is, don't fixate on having what somebody else has, but instead learn contentment in our lives. And these 10 rules have the power to set us free. But when we look at them and we recognize what they mean, we also come to feel how far short we fall of what God's will and plan is for us. And so part of what I would remind you of is that all of these things point to why we need a Savior. They point to why we need a second Moses, who will make a new covenant with us and who will offer us forgiveness and mercy and grace. So if you read the 10 Commandments and you find yourself convicted by how far you fall short of it, you're in good company. All of us do. These are rules to live by. They stand for our benefit, but we're all going to fall short. And what we know is that God has said, I'm still going to forgive you. I'm still going to love you. And I'm still going to call you to live according to these commands so that you might not be slaves, but might be free.